Hello, welcome to today's session on mandibular anatomical landmarks. There's a lot of noise all around. I hope my audio remains clear today. Let's see the landmarks. This elevation here in the front is a fold of mucous membrane, the labial frenum. And in between the labial frenum and the buccal frenum at the side, we have the labial sulcus, this light blue portion. Unlike the maxillary labial frenum, the mandibular labial frenum is active due to the presence of muscle fibers. Both mandibular labial frenum and the labial sulcus is influenced by the action of the muscles orbicularis oris, the incisivis, the depressor labii inferioris and mentalis. Let's see the first one, the orbicularis oris. Though it appears that it is arranged circularly around the mouth, actually it has fibers in different strata, all arranged in different directions, and they derive from other facial muscles like buccinator, depressor labii inferioris, etc. It's complicated, but let me just say that this sphincter muscle is responsible for closure of mouth, the puckering action, that is your trending typical selfie expression, or maybe I'll be more clear if I just say it's also called the kissing muscle. The other muscle fibers acting on this frenum is the incisivis, which is labial to mentalis, the depressor labii inferioris, which draws the lips downwards, giving the typical expression of irony, and mentalis, which raises and protrudes the lip, as in the expression of doubt or disdain. So, a careful recording of this active frenum during clinical steps, or that is border molding, ensures that the muscle action do not displace the lower denture. Coming to the buccal frenum, this fan-shaped mucous membrane overlies the depressor anguli oris. So along with this muscle, the buccinator muscle too has fibers inserted over here. So both these muscles significantly affect the action of this frenum. From the buccal frenum to the retromolar pad, we have the buccal sulcus, this green shaped portion. The depth and width of the sulcus, this buccal sulcus, is again significantly affected by the muscles I already mentioned. Along with that, the distobuccal corner of the buccal sulcus, you have to remember an important point here. This is influenced by the action of masseter. Okay, let me try explaining that to you. I have a mandibular bone here. So, your denture, this is your residual alveolar ridge, right? The ones the teeth are extracted, this is your residual alveolar ridge. So, your denture, when it's seated here, we are talking about this region, this buccal sulcus, right? So, the distobuccal corner of your buccal sulcus, this portion, it comes very close here, right? So, you know that the masseter muscle is inserted in this region. So when the masseter muscle contracts, that is when the patient bites against pressure, closes the mouth, clenches into something hard or something like that, the masseter muscle contracts. The anterior border of the masseter muscle bulges into this area. Can you see that? It is close to that area, right? So this muscle is going to bulge into this area, and if it is correctly recorded, it produces a notch in your impression in this area, the distobuccal area, and it is called the messetric notch. Okay, next one, the retromolar pad. This forms your posterior limit of your lower denture. That is, your denture shouldn't extend beyond the retromolar pad. So the retromolar pad forms the distal boundary of your lower denture. My structure is nothing but a connective tissue lined by non-keratinized epithelium, and the connective tissue is infiltrated by loose areolar tissue, muscle fibers, glandular cells. Now coming to the muscle fibers here, it will be easy to remember if you remember the anatomical landmark related to it. See, your retromolar pad comes here, right? So the muscle fibers will be laterally. You have the cheek here, right? So laterally the cheek muscle is the buccinator. So laterally the buccinator, and superiorly the temporalis. The temporalis is somewhere here in the sides of the forehead. So the tendon of temporalis comes and gets inserted here. So you have the fibers of temporalis superiorly, and posteriorly you have the pterygomandibular raphe right behind your retromolar pad. here, retromolar pad, we have the pterygomandibular raphe. It extends from here and superiorly it is attached to the pterygoid hamulus. If you remember my class on maxillary anatomical landmarks, you will remember seeing that hook-like structure of the sphenoid bone, the pterygoid hamulus. So posteriorly we'll have the pterygomandibular raphe, and medially, this is a medial side, right? Medial side we have the tongue here, right? Tongue, and posteriorly we have the pharynx. So medially the muscle will be superior constrictor muscle. Clear? So those are the muscle attachments and muscle fibers inserted in the retromolar pad. The structures on the lingual side. Anteriorly in the midline we have a fold of mucous membrane called the lingual frenum, which is under the influence of genioglossus muscle. The denture will have a corresponding notch on the lingual side to accommodate the actions of this frenum. Fine. Now extending from the lingual frenum posteriorly towards the retromylohyoid region, this is a retromylohyoid region, we have a long sulcus called the alveolo-lingual sulcus. Now this sulcus is divided into three regions by the mylohyoid ridge. To make it clear, I think we will go back to our mandibular bone. So on the lingual side, see, you can see a very prominent ridge here. Can you see this? I hope you all are familiar with the anatomy of mandible. This is the very prominent mylohyoid ridge. Can you see this? This ridge running long. So I said the alveolo-lingual sulcus is divided into three. The first portion, the anterior region. See, your lingual frenum comes somewhere here in the midline, right? So extending from the lingual frenum to the pre-mylohyoid fossa, that is just before the mylohyoid ridge starts. Okay, we have a small dip here. So then comes the eminence, right? So the pre-mylohyoid fossa from lingual frenum to the pre-mylohyoid fossa, we have this anterior region, and it is also called the sublingual crescent area. Fine. The second region, the middle portion, extends from pre-mylohyoid fossa to the distal end of mylohyoid ridge. Longer portion, see, it extends from, that is from the beginning of the mylohyoid ridge to the end of mylohyoid ridge. Clear? The second portion, anterior, middle. Now the posterior portion extends from the distal end of mylohyoid ridge to the retromylohyoid fossa. Can you see a dip? Again a dip. Okay, right? This is a prominence, then it dips inside, right? So this fossa is called the retromylohyoid fossa. Accurate recording of this sulcus during border molding plays a crucial role in retention of the lower denture. Here you can see a special tray on which border molding has been completed. We get an S curve if this region is recorded accurately, that is formed due to the prominence of the mylohyoid ridge and the depression of the retromylohyoid fossa. The muscles acting here will be obviously the muscle attached to the mylohyoid ridge, that is the mylohyoid muscles, and the tongue movements formed by the tongue muscles, the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the tongue, and the retromylohyoid fossa is under the influence of the retromylohyoid curtain formed by superior constrictor, genioglossus, palatoglossus, etc. Okay. So that's about the limiting structures in mandibular arch. Now moving on to the supporting structures. The primary stress bearing area in the mandibular arch is the buccal shelf area, this portion marked in red. It is a primary stress bearing area because the underlying bone, we have a smooth dense cortical bone, and the trabecular pattern in the bone is such that it is almost perpendicular to the direction of occlusal forces. This is almost flat and it lies perpendicular to the direction of occlusal forces. So it's best, it is in an ideal position suited to withstand masticatory forces. The overlying masticatory mucosa is keratinized and the submucosa is firm and resilient, and it is firmly attached to underlying bone. So all these features makes this buccal shelf area a primary stress bearing area. Let's see where it extends from. So anteriorly, see, this was the buccal frenum. So anteriorly you have the buccal frenum. Posteriorly you have the retromolar pad. Fine. Medially, this is a medial side, this is a lateral side. Medially, this portion is the crest of the ridge, and laterally you have the external oblique ridge. Okay, I think it will be clear in the board. See, this is your buccal shelf area, this portion. Okay, this portion is the buccal shelf area. So this is the external oblique ridge running laterally. It goes up to the ramus of the mandible, this ridge. Okay, can you see this prominence here? So that is the lateral boundary. Okay, the secondary stress bearing areas are the slopes of residual ridge. This yellow portion, it's a slope of residual ridge. So that serves as a secondary stress bearing area. And the rilling areas in mandibular arch are the crest of the ridge. As mentioned earlier, the crest of the ridge is not at all suited to withstand masticatory forces because it may have sharp spiny bony spicules. The sockets may be just under the process of remodeling and it is easily subjected to resorption. So the crest of the ridge becomes a relieving area. The other relieving areas in mandibular arch are, we have this mental foramen. What happens is if the resorption has progressed to a considerable extent, by resorption I mean the loss of bone. So the bone height keeps reducing as the years pass by. It's a physiological process. So if the height of this bone has been lost to a great extent, what happens is this mental foramen will be closer to the crest of the ridge, right? Here the resorption has not progressed much. The mental foramen is midway between the margins of where the teeth were and the base of the mandible. But if this portion was lost, this will appear closer to the crest, right? So we have nerves and blood vessels coming out through it, so it will be compromised. So this becomes a relieving area. And the other relieving areas in the mandibular, I hope you remember, these are the genial tubercles. You have superior genial tubercles and inferior genial tubercles. Again, this is a prominent region, so this will require relief. And of course, your mylohydrid is very sharp and prominent. In certain people, it will be too prominent. So the mandibular, the lingual flange of the lower denture, if it compresses too much on it, it can easily lead to soreness and ulceration. So the mylohydrid becomes a relieving area. And in certain people, there may be prominences on the lingual side. In the premolar region, bony prominence is called the torus mandibularis. So these are the relieving areas in the mandibular arch. With that, we wind up a series of videos on anatomical landmarks. I have done my best to convey to you all the most relevant points in the simple manner possible. I hope it was useful to you. So until we meet again, thank you. Take care.